So like I said before, with the rule of translations, it could be anything, right? Depending on where we're moving our triangle, we just change the numbers in our rule. Rule of reflections is a lot simpler, okay? There's only two of them. We are either going to reflect across the x-axis or we're going to reflect across the y-axis. There's only two options at this point. Next year you'll have more options, but this year there's only two options. We're either reflecting across the x or we're reflecting across the y. So, if we take a look back to yesterday, right? We wrote down what we noticed happening to our coordinates from pre-image to image. When we reflected over the x-axis, what changed? It says right here, what changed when we reflected over the x-axis? The y-coordinate. What changed when we reflected over the y-axis? The x-coordinate. So the rule here is going to be very simple. If I reflect over the x-axis, my rule is just x, comma, negative y. And what this negative sign means is that we're going to flip the sign. So plus turns to a minus, and minus turns to a plus. A lot of times people see that negative y and go, oh, y has to be negative. Well, if it's already negative, what we're doing is we're making it positive. We're not changing anything about the numbers. We're not changing the order of the x and the y. We're just flipping the sign of our y. If I'm reflecting over the y-axis, I'm just doing the opposite. My rule would be negative x, comma, y. Again, I'm flipping the sign. Plus goes to minus, minus goes to plus. And where a lot of people get tripped up here, of course, is that even though we're reflecting on the x, we're flipping the sign of our y. When we're reflecting on the y, we're changing the sign of our x. So you got to kind of think in terms of opposites here, which makes sense because in a reflection, everything's the opposite, right? So you may think, oh, I'm reflecting on the x, I'm going to make x negative. No, you got to think other way. If I'm flipping over the x, my y is negative. If I'm flipping over the y, my x is negative. Okay? So for example, if I have a pre-image point A at 2, 4, and I were to reflect this point over the x-axis, yeah, sure. Well, if I'm reflecting over the x-axis, what am I going to flip? The sign of my x or the sign of my y? If I'm reflecting over the x-axis, am I flipping the sign of my x or my y? My y. Well, what's my y here? In point A. 4. So what's the inverse of positive 4? Negative 4. Am I going to do anything with the 2? No. Nope. 2, negative 4. That's all. Right? We're just flipping the sign. If it's positive, we make it negative. If I were to reflect over the y-axis, let's say point B is at -1, -3. Okay, if point B is at -1, -3, and I'm reflecting over the y-axis, which coordinate am I changing the sign of? My x or my y? The x. Well, what's the inverse of -1? Positive 1. 1 comma. Am I doing anything with the y though? Nope. It stays as -3. Right? So even though my x coordinate is already negative, what my rule is telling me to do is to flip the sign. So if it's negative, it becomes positive. -1, -3. Reflected over the y-axis becomes +1, -3. We're not flipping both of them, right? We're just flipping the one. Let's try 2 more, and then we'll just get right to work. If I'm going to reflect over the x-axis, and point C is at -2, 6. See if you can figure out for yourself real quick what C prime's coordinates would be if I reflect over the x-axis with those coordinates. He's not here today. Thank you. Good. So if we're focusing on the x, we're changing which sign the x or the y. We're changing the y, which is good. That means we're not doing anything to the x. There you go. That's tricky to remember. If I'm reflecting over the x, which of these numbers am I flipping? My x or my y? I'm flipping my y. Which means right away my x is not changing at all. It stays as a -2. Right? What does 6 turn into though? -6. Right? We don't want to flip both of them. We just want to flip the opposite coordinate for whatever axis we're reflecting on. Give this one a try. If I'm reflecting over the y-axis and my point D is at 4, -3, see if you can figure out real quick what D prime's coordinates will be if we reflect over the y-axis. Good. Perfect. Okay, if I'm reflecting over the y-axis, which coordinate am I flipping, the x or the y?
4.
The The x, my 4. So what does 4 turn into?
Negative 4.
Negative 3.
What does negative 3 turn into?
Nothing.
Nothing. It stays negative 3. Good.
Can I change the positive?
Nope, we're only flipping the one sign. That's a great question. Yeah, like I said, we're only ever changing one of them. Okay? So you see what axis it tells you? Y. Okay, I'm changing the x. When it says x-axis, okay, I'm changing the y. But we never want to flip them both. Okay? Any questions I could answer about all of that? Thumbs up if that seems easy enough. Okay. We'll see. Hopefully it won't be too bad. The homework is super short anyway. It's only 8 questions. 22. All right?